He's to guide us into all truth. And what do we mean by all truth? Well, the helper, the Holy Future. And a lot of you guys probably started reading the Bible because you're like, I want to know what's going to happen. I know when I was a kid and I was like people reading the Bible, I wasn't reading it because I wanted to learn morality. I learned it because I want to know what God was going to do with stuff in the future. And that other stuff started coming with it and became pretty important. But the Holy Spirit does more than that. I would say primarily the Holy Spirit applies Jesus into our lives. We need the Holy Spirit to apply Jesus in our lives. I came across this great quote. It's from Gary Friesen. The Holy Spirit transforms the objective truth about God into a subjective experience of God. So the Holy Spirit, part of his role is to say, you know what? God seems kind of distant. I know. He's huge. He's powerful. He's wise. He's different. But I'm going to put this big God inside of you. And you're going to experience the love of God, the hope of God, the joy of God. You're going to start to live out the character of God in your life. This is, I believe, what James is talking about when he says, you can't just be a hearer of the word, you got to be a doer of the word. This is how the Holy Spirit works in our lives. You know, James never mentions the Holy Spirit in the letter. He assumes it. He assumes that God is at work through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is going to guide us into all truth. And that means to live it out, to experience it. We should experience theology in our hearts, our souls, our minds, and our bodies. The Holy Spirit bridges the gap that sometimes is between our minds, what we believe, and how we live. Spirit. I believe the disciples experienced this when Jesus was around. He would teach them these things, and they're like, how is this true? This is blowing my mind. And I think Pentecost marked a turning point in the church. Pentecost marked the event when the church began to experience all Jesus taught. I think they were doing their best to follow Jesus when he was here. And I think part of the reason he says it's so good is like, you know what? You're going to have the power now to live out what I taught. Important. Jesus doesn't want just have us to know the truth. He wants us to experience everything to our lives. Howard Hendricks has this great quote. It's a little provocative, but it's good. He says, interpretation without application is abortion. Like, wow. You know, just the word abortion probably makes some of you guys kind of sick. Like there's life and people are taking it. You think of what the Holy Spirit does in our lives. He takes the truth of God that Jesus has given and he puts it inside of us. And what do? Do we apply it or do we let it die inside of us? We need the Holy Spirit so that we apply the truth. We live it out. We do it. The Holy Spirit draws us to Jesus and to one another. You guys probably remember the juice boxes, right? If you were at the Grand Prix, we had the Capri Sun, which is kind of like a juice box, but it's a bag and it's got a straw and you stick it in and then you drink it. You know, I think in a lot of ways Jesus was kind of like the juice bag. And he was leading them around and they wanted to have access to him. They wanted to be like him. They wanted to do what he said, but there was something missing. He says, it's good that I'm going because if I'm going, I'm going to give you the straw. The Holy Spirit is the straw that gives us access to Jesus. He's a person of the Trinity that gives us access to Jesus, so we have access to the Father. This is how God works. It's a completeness. But it's for our benefit, that we may have the nurturing spiritual benefits that Jesus wanted us to have. And that's personal, but it's also corporate as the church. The Holy Spirit is fragile. It's a but think of how close you have to be to share a straw with somebody. When we're depending on the same Spirit, we are one. Now, this is something that God does, but Paul says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit. So the Spirit accomplishes it, so we're to make every effort to keep the unity accomplished by the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you are called to one hope when you are called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. You start looking at other churches a little different when you see this verse. Whoa, we're one. Unity happens whether we're together or not because it's a spiritual thing. Now, Jesus talks about this when he talks to the Samaritan woman. He tells her that a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. Well, how does this apply to Christian unity? Do you remember what Jesus was saying to the Samaritan woman? He said, Jerusalem. And then Jesus, because a time is now here with me that you worship in spirit and in truth. I mean, it's such a blessing to worship in the same room is a part of our life.